Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled The Key of Eternity: The Awakening of Aveline. Act 1, The Whisper Before Sleep. The moonlight spilled through the curtain's edge like a soft silver ribbon, tracing its gentle glow across the wooden floor. Outside, a breeze stirred the treetops, sending ripples through the leaves, like the forest itself was breathing in its sleep. The air was still, yet not silent, full of the kinds of quiet sounds that only reveal themselves when the world slows down: the soft rustling of linen, the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel, and the rhythmic hush of wind against glass. Aveline sat perched at the edge of her bed, her long hair cascading like a velvet shawl over her shoulders. Her eyes wandered toward the window, where the moon had climbed high, as if watching over the earth from its celestial throne. She always found comfort in the night, not because of sleep, but because it felt like the only time the world stopped rushing. In that pause, memories whispered a little louder. Tonight felt different. She couldn't explain why. There was no reason to feel restless, no voice in the hall, no creaking from the attic. And yet, there was a hum in the air, a silence that held its breath too long. The kind that wrapped around you, not to scare, but to invite. An invitation to remember. To feel. Aveline reached for the glass lantern on her bedside table, its golden glow flickering to life with a twist of the wick. It cast warm shadows across the room, transforming ordinary corners into quiet caverns, and the smooth walls into cliffs carved by time. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders like a cloak, stood up, and padded barefoot across the room. Her fingers brushed against the spine of a book resting by the window, an old journal, bound in faded leather, its pages slightly curled from age and air. It had been years since she'd touched it. She wasn't even sure why she kept it. It held no great secrets, no ancient map or childhood scribbles. Just thoughts. Quiet ones. She opened it slowly. Blank pages greeted her. But she didn't remember them being blank. There were entries here, weren't there? Words she'd written as a girl, stories she'd told herself late into the night. Yet page after page, the ink had vanished, like breath on a window pane. She turned another page and paused. One sentence remained. To find what was lost, follow what whispers. Aveline's heart fluttered, not in fear, but in recognition. Like a chord had been struck inside her, faint, familiar. She glanced around her room again. Everything was where it should be. The framed paintings, the chest at the foot of her bed, the little candlelit alcove where her cat used to sleep. But something was calling. Softly. Barely there. A whisper, not in sound, but in feeling. She turned toward the old wooden wardrobe, standing like a sentinel at the far wall. It had belonged to her grandmother. The kind with ornate carvings of vines and suns, and a lock that never quite worked. She hadn't opened it in years. Her bare feet crossed the cold floor. She hesitated, then grasped the curved iron handle. With a groan, the door swung open. Inside, among the neatly folded linens and hanging scarves, something new, no, something forgotten caught her eye. A key. It wasn't there before. She was sure of it. Small, brass, worn with time, yet glinting in the light like it had just been polished. Attached to it was a thin chain and a piece of parchment folded neatly. She unrolled it. "Come see what time forgot." Aveline blinked, the breath catching in her throat. A sense of wonder rose in her chest. Whatever this was, it wasn't ordinary. And yet, it didn't feel threatening. It felt destined. She held the key tightly in her palm. Its cool weight was oddly comforting. She didn't know where it would lead her yet, but she knew one thing for certain: tonight would not end with sleep. Tonight would begin a journey. She lit a second lantern, just in case. Draped her blanket tighter. Then glanced once more at the moon before walking toward the attic stairwell hidden behind the tapestry at the end of the hall. It creaked faintly as she pulled it aside. She hesitated on the first step. That familiar scent of dust and time drifted down like a welcome. She wasn't just going into the attic. She was stepping back into something long buried. Something waiting. Something once hers. And so began the journey of quiet echoes and forgotten magic. The first step into memory. Act 2, Moonlight, Dust and Forgotten Steps. The narrow staircase creaked under Aveline's careful steps, each groan of the wood like the house was slowly awakening from a long, dreamless slumber. She held the lantern in front of her, its glow pushing the darkness aside inch by inch, revealing cobwebs strung like silk threads between the beams and dust that shimmered in the light like falling stars. She hadn't been up here since she was a child. Back then, the attic had felt enormous. A secret place above the world where time stood still. Now, it was smaller, more intimate, but it still held that strange stillness. The kind of hush that makes you feel like you're not alone, even when you are. She reached the top of the stairs and paused. Her breath formed tiny clouds in the cool air. The moonlight filtered in through a small round window, dust dancing in its beams. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and something softer, lavender maybe, or memory itself. Her lantern cast long shadows across trunks and old furniture covered in linen sheets. Each shape looked like a ghost frozen mid-thought, a sentinel watching over forgotten stories. Aveline stepped inside. She let her hand trail along the edge of an old cabinet, feeling the ridges carved into its stars, waves, and sunbursts, all worn smooth by time. She remembered hiding behind it once, giggling as her cousins searched for her. That was the last summer they'd all been together here. The silence wrapped around her like a soft scarf. She moved toward the far corner, where the light barely reached. Her foot brushed against something fabric. No, a rug. A small, intricate tapestry laid on the wooden floor, half covered in dust. She knelt and swept it aside. There it was. The outline of a trapdoor. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the attic she remembered. She stared at it for a long moment, then reached for the key hanging around her neck. The brass key. The message. Come see what time forgot. Her fingers trembled as they slid the key into a nearly invisible slot on the floorboard next to the trapdoor. It clicked softly, like a sigh. The panel loosened with a creak that sent a thrill down her spine. She lifted it. Beneath, a narrow passage descended into darkness. Not cold or damp, but warm, oddly warm, as if a candle had just been extinguished somewhere far below. Lantern in hand, Aveline descended slowly. The air changed with every step. It thickened not in a heavy way, but in a rich, golden way, like syrupy sunlight. The wooden stairs turned into stone. The sound of her breath echoed faintly now, as if the walls around her were expanding. And then she stepped into it. A room. A hidden room. Underground, yet alive with echoes of the past. The walls were lined with shelves, and each shelf was lined with objects, books, trinkets, tiny vials, rolled up scrolls, clocks with no hands, stones that shimmered even in shadow. It was like stepping into the heart of a memory that didn't belong to any one person, but to a family line, or a dream passed down. In the center stood a pedestal. Upon it, another box similar to the one in the attic, but different. This one wasn't locked. It was waiting. She stepped closer and opened it. Inside were 3 items. A feather, delicate and golden like the wing of a phoenix. A folded letter with her name Aveline written in a script she did not recognize. And a tiny compass that spun even when still. She picked up the letter. You've heard them too, the echoes. This place is for those who remember. But to understand, you must first revisit what you've left behind. There was no signature. Just a small sigil at the bottom, a spiral, surrounded by stars. Aveline sat down on the stone floor, her back against the wall, lantern by her side. Her mind buzzed with questions, but her body felt calm. Grounded. Like the house itself was telling her she was exactly where she needed to be. Somewhere above her, the wind howled softly. The trees rustled. But down here, time was syrup thick and still. She tucked the letter into her journal. The feather into her pocket. The compass into her palm. It didn't point north. It pointed backward. Not in direction but in time. Aveline closed her eyes. The echoes had only just begun. Act 3, The Memory Chest. The silence in the hidden chamber was profound, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that felt full, like a breath held just before a word is spoken, or the quiet that follows a story so old it's forgotten how to end. Aveline sat cross-legged on the smooth stone floor, the lantern beside her painting golden ripples across the walls. The little compass still spun gently in her hand, as if stirred by some invisible current. It made no sense. It pointed in no consistent direction, only moving when she wasn't looking directly at it, like it responded to thought, not geography. Her fingers hovered over the memory chest again. It wasn't large, about the size of a bread box, but it was carved with a care that hinted at meaning. Tiny symbols spiraled across the surface: crescent moons, falling leaves, a sleeping cat, a curled up fox, stars stitched into swirling wind. She ran her hand across them, and they felt warm, familiar. As if someone had once told her the story behind each one, but she no longer remembered. A small brass latch clicked open with a gentle push. Inside, there were 6 objects. None extraordinary on their own, but all radiating something unspoken. Not magic, exactly, but memory. The kind that lives in the folds of time, in the corners of the mind, just out of reach. She lifted the first item. A wooden whistle, carved like a bird. It had chipped paint and a worn mouthpiece. Aveline held it close. She remembered this, or something like it. A garden. A game. A melody that only birds understood. Then the second. A silver locket, its hinge rusted, its chain delicate as spider silk. She opened it. Inside were 2 silhouettes, no faces, just outlines. Yet looking at them, her chest tightened, as though something sacred lived inside that space. The third. A seashell, pink and white, with a spiral that seemed to go on forever. When she held it to her ear, there was no ocean roar, but something deeper. A voice. A lullaby. She couldn't tell. But it soothed her. The fourth. A patch of fabric, soft and floral, frayed at the edges. Her fingers knew it before her mind did. A sleeve. A favorite dress. Or curtains from a room long gone. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, smelled lemon soap and sun-warmed window sills. The fifth. A small, sealed envelope, wax stamped with the same spiral sigil she had seen earlier. She held it but didn't open it yet. Not because she was afraid, but because it didn't feel like its time had come. And finally the sixth. A tiny candle, unlit, wrapped in twine. It smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. There was a word carved at its base in the tiniest script, "When ready." Aveline set the items gently on the floor, forming a circle. She sat in the center, her mind swirling. These weren't just objects. They were pieces. Pieces of a forgotten puzzle, her puzzle. She had lived a life full of stories, dreams, and quiet joys, but somewhere along the way, the pages had faded. These were the breadcrumbs. The signs left behind by someone, perhaps herself, to find the way back. She opened her journal again. The once blank pages now held faint outlines. Not words yet, but impressions. A smudge where a date used to be. A line drawn without ink. Like ghosts of stories trying to return. She touched the feather from earlier, the one in the other box, and placed it atop the journal. Nothing happened. But then, the candle flickered. Still unlit, but flickered. Aveline's heart jumped. She leaned in closer. Was it a breeze? A trick of light? Then she heard it. Not with her ears, but with something older. A voice not from the room, but from within the chest of memory. There is more. You left yourself a path. The first story waits beneath the tree. The compass stilled. Its needle now pointed true. Not in the direction of north, but toward the window high above in the attic, where moonlight still streamed in. She smiled. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the invitation. Aveline gathered the 6 items, tucked them into the satchel she always kept near her writing desk. She blew out the lantern, but the glow of the candle remained even though no flame danced upon its wick. She climbed the stairs back into the attic with a heart no longer heavy with confusion, but full of purpose. Tomorrow, she would follow the compass. Tomorrow, she would stand beneath the tree. But tonight, she would dream of a melody only birds remember. And so the story begins to remember itself. Act 4, The Tree Beneath the Moon. The morning came gently, with a mist that hung low over the grass and filtered the sunlight into soft ribbons. Aveline stepped outside with the compass in her palm and the satchel slung across her shoulder, the 6 memory objects tucked safely inside. Her boots sank slightly into the damp earth, and the scent of dew and old oak leaves wrapped around her like a shawl. The needle pointed forward steadfast, unwavering, as if the world itself knew the way, even if she didn't. She followed the path past the garden her grandmother once tended, now wild with thyme and dandelions. Past the small stone bench where she'd read fairy tales aloud to herself. And then, through the tall grass where forgotten stepping stones lay buried under moss and thyme. At the edge of the property stood a tree. Not just any tree, but the tree. It towered taller than any she remembered, its bark gnarled and silver in the light, its limbs sprawling like the arms of a guardian. The base of its trunk curved outward, forming a hollow large enough for a child to hide inside, or perhaps, something more. Aveline remembered this place. As a girl, she'd called it the listening tree. She'd whisper her secrets into its knotty bark and pretend the tree listened. That it remembered. Now, standing here again, she felt the air shift. Not colder but deeper. As if every leaf above her held a memory, trembling gently in the breeze. She knelt near the roots. The compass in her hand stopped spinning and pulsed once softly. Like a heartbeat. She pressed her fingers against the bark, tracing a familiar line along its surface. And there it was, a symbol she'd drawn long ago, with a stick and wild imagination. A spiral inside a star. The same sigil on the envelope. The same as in her journal. "You've been here before," she whispered. And the wind answered with a rustle that felt like a nod. She leaned closer to the hollow. Inside, the shadows curled like sleeping animals. Something glimmered at the base, barely visible unless the light caught it just right. Aveline reached inside. Her fingers brushed against something smooth wood. No, leather. She pulled it out slowly. A small, worn book. Bound in green cloth, edges softened with time, and a thin ribbon tied around it like a present waiting to be opened. She untied the ribbon and opened the cover. A name was written in the front. Aveline Serafin Morrow. In her own handwriting. But she had never seen this book before. Inside were pages and pages of stories. Her stories. Some she remembered vaguely, fragments of dreams she'd once told herself at night. But others were entirely unfamiliar. Whole adventures. Letters. Dialogues with people she didn't recall creating, but whose voices she could almost hear. A fox who walked upright and guarded an ancient forest. A boy with a clock for a heart, searching for his missing minute. A library beneath the river, where books floated like jellyfish. Each story felt like it had been written in another life. Or perhaps left behind by the girl she used to be, the one who hadn't yet learned how to forget. And there, tucked between the pages, was a photograph. Faded and sepia-toned. A girl herself, maybe 8 years old, standing beneath the same tree, holding a feather and smiling. But in the background, just behind her shoulder, was something strange. A doorway. Arched, stone-framed. Half buried in ivy. She turned to look behind the tree. There was nothing now. Just bark, moss, and shadows. But the photograph trembled faintly in her hands. As if it too remembered. She took a breath and placed the photograph back in the book. Then, from her satchel, she removed the candle, the one with the words "when ready" carved at its base. She set it gently in the hollow. No match. No flame. Just intention. Aveline closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm ready." And the candle lit. A single, golden flame, warm and quiet. The breeze stilled. The tree stopped rustling. And somewhere in the earth below, something ancient exhaled like a sigh of recognition. A faint outline shimmered on the bark and arch, just like in the photograph. It lasted only a second, then vanished. But it was enough. She wasn't imagining this. The stories weren't just memories. They were maps. And the next destination was waiting. Act 5, the door that wasn't there. The candle's golden flame flickered quietly in the hollow of the tree, casting soft glows against the bark. Aveline watched as the outline of a doorway shimmered again, briefly visible, like breath on glass, and then disappeared once more into the grain of the tree. She stepped back. Was it just light? Just imagination? The compass in her pocket pulsed again. Once. Then stopped. She turned it over in her hand and noticed something she hadn't before, a small inscription along the edge of its brass frame. Tiny, almost invisible unless you looked for it. What is lost is never truly gone. Her heart beat a little faster. This wasn't about finding a path. It was about remembering one. She reached into her satchel, fingers closing around the sealed envelope from the memory chest. The wax seal was still unbroken, still etched with the spiral sigil. She held it for a moment, then tore it open. Inside was a single slip of paper. Not all doors are meant to open. Some are meant to return. Write it again. No explanation. No instructions. Just those words. She looked at the tree again. The bark was ordinary now. Solid, weathered, unmoving. But if writing had summoned memories in the journal, if stories were the key. Aveline pulled out the green cloth book, the one she found beneath the tree, and flipped to a blank page. She sat cross-legged beneath the branches, opened her pen, and began to write. There once was a girl who remembered things she had forgotten. She followed a whisper into the dark, and found a door where no door should be. As the final stroke of ink dried, a wind stirred. Not a breeze. A breath. The tree groaned. Not with age, but with awakening. And there it was. The door. No longer a shimmer. A real, arched doorway now stood embedded into the trunk, its frame made of twisting branches and smooth stone. Vines curled gently around its edges, and at its center was a brass handle shaped like a quill. She stood slowly, notebook clutched tightly to her chest. This shouldn't exist. And yet it felt like it always had. She reached out, took hold of the quill handle, and pulled. The door opened without a sound. What lay beyond was not darkness. It was color. Warm, amber light spilled out like the glow of a firelit room at dusk. Aveline stepped through. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the air changed. She was no longer under the tree. She stood in a hallway that looked like it had been stitched from memory itself. Wooden beams curved above her like the inside of a ship, lined with soft lanterns that floated freely, weightless and warm. The walls were covered in old tapestries embroidered with stories, a girl and a fox walking through a frozen wood, a tower that sang, a storm that whispered names. Her stories. Each tapestry shimmered slightly when she neared, like it remembered her. She reached out to one and traced the thread of a silver moon. As her finger brushed the thread, the lanterns dimmed. The hallway shifted. A door appeared in the wall. Unmarked. Simple. But she understood what it meant. This place wasn't just memory. It was a library. A sanctuary. A hidden place where every story she'd ever written or ever dreamed had taken root and lived on. She opened a new door. Inside was a small circular room filled with floating books, glimmering pages, and quiet, turning music. A violin played somewhere, soft and slow, as if echoing a lullaby half remembered. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and upon it, another object. A snow globe. She picked it up. Inside was a miniature version of the tree outside. The listening tree. And beneath it, a tiny version of her, writing in her notebook. She tilted it. Snowflakes fell gently over the scene. Aveline held it close to her chest. Somewhere, something in her shifted. She was no longer just remembering. She was returning. And there were still so many rooms to find. So many doors waiting. So many stories whispering to be remembered. Act 6, The Room of Forgotten Songs. Aveline stepped deeper into the circular room, her gaze sweeping over the floating books and the warm, inviting glow that seemed to emanate from everything around her. The violin music lingered in the air, filling the space with a melancholic sweetness, like the echo of a lullaby lost in time. As she wandered further, something caught her eye. At the far end of the room, behind a set of arching bookshelves, was a door, small, unassuming, with no handle. Just an engraving on the wood, a pair of crossed musical notes. It was as if it had been waiting for her, patiently. Like everything in this place. She stepped closer, heart pounding softly in her chest. The moment she touched the door, it opened with a gentle push. Inside was a room unlike the others. Unlike anything she had ever seen. This room wasn't just a place, it was alive. The walls pulsed with the beat of music, rippling like the surface of a lake disturbed by wind. The air itself hummed with the remnants of forgotten melodies, as if the room itself was singing, not with words, but with the memory of all the songs ever lost to time. At the center of the room stood a large, ancient gramophone, its brass horn gleaming in the soft light. But it was more than a gramophone, it seemed to be made of the very air around her, like the music it played was part of the fabric of this place. Aveline walked closer, drawn to the soft hum of the machine. As she reached out to touch it, a soft glow flickered in the corner of the room. There, resting against the wall, was a music box. A small, delicate thing, carved in intricate designs of flowers and vines, its surface polished by years of love and care. Aveline felt a pang of recognition, though she couldn't place where it had come from. Her fingers brushed the lid, and the box opened with a soft chime. The music began. The melody was slow at first, but then it built, each note weaving itself into the air, as if the room itself was resonating with the sound. Aveline closed her eyes, letting the tune wash over her. She felt it deep in her chest, familiar, haunting. The song she'd forgotten but had always known. It was a lullaby. Her lullaby. Her mother had sung it to her when she was little. She remembered the warmth of her mother's voice, the way it wrapped around her like a blanket. But the memory was fragile, as if it had been buried too long to keep its shape. But now, as the music flowed around her, the pieces began to fall back into place. The room seemed to respond. The walls trembled slightly, and the music played louder, stronger, as if encouraging her to remember more. Aveline closed her eyes again, allowing the song to guide her. When you feel lost, listen for the songs of the past. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. It was as though the room itself was speaking to her. She opened her eyes. On the far side of the room, a faint glow appeared beneath the tapestry, the edges of it fluttering like the wings of a bird. She walked toward it, the melody still playing softly in the background, and pushed aside the fabric. Behind the tapestry was another door, smaller than the last. This one was covered in symbols, notes, lines, and keys like the door to a forgotten symphony. Aveline didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her hand resting on the door's handle. This was it. The next step. The next piece of the puzzle. She turned the handle. The door creaked open, and a new sound filled her ears. It was a choir voices, soft and haunting, echoing like a memory from the deepest part of her soul. The sound of forgotten songs. The voices of those who had once sung them. Her mother's lullaby, the music her grandmother had hummed while tending the garden, the lull of the wind that had sung her to sleep at night. These were her songs. The songs of her life. Aveline stepped through the door, and the room unfolded before her. It was a garden. The garden from her childhood. The trees were familiar, the flowers still bright with color, but it was different. This was a garden from a time before the memories had faded, before the songs had been forgotten. Her mother stood in the garden, humming a lullaby as she tended to the flowers. The wind whispered through the branches. Aveline stepped forward, her breath caught in her throat. Her mother looked up and smiled. "You found your way back." The room shimmered, and then, just as quickly, faded. Aveline was back in the music room. The song had ended. The gramophone fell silent. But the warmth of the memory lingered, soft and comforting. She stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the lingering echoes of the past. Somewhere, deep inside, she knew she hadn't just remembered a song. She had found a part of herself. A piece that had been lost for so long, but had always been waiting to return. Aveline turned and walked back toward the door, the music box still playing softly in her mind. There was more to find. More songs to remember. More rooms to open. And, with each step, she was finding her way home. Act 7, The Library of Lost Stories. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, as if the very walls of this place were made from the pages of forgotten books. Aveline stepped into the room slowly, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. The light in the room seemed to shift, casting long shadows that curled like tendrils of forgotten memories. The warmth from the garden was gone, replaced by a cool, quiet stillness. This was a different kind of room. A different kind of place. The walls stretched high above her, lined with shelves that seemed to go on forever, crammed with books of every size and color. Some were thick and bound in leather, others were delicate and worn, their spines barely visible beneath layers of dust. Each one seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as though the stories within them had been waiting for someone to open them, waiting for someone to remember. Aveline felt her heart beat faster. She had stumbled upon something deep, something that went beyond the stories of her childhood or the songs that had been sung to her. This was a place where every story, every memory, every dream was kept safe, hidden away from the world. A library of things never told. Of things long forgotten. She moved toward the nearest shelf and pulled out a book. The cover was smooth and gold, with no title, just a simple image of a tree with twisting roots, like the one outside. She opened it to the first page. Nothing was written. No words. No stories. Just a single line at the bottom of the page. Some stories are waiting to be written. Aveline closed the book, her mind racing. Was this a message? A reminder? Or simply the beginning of something new? She placed the book back on the shelf, and then, instinctively, her hand reached for another one. This one was smaller, bound in a faded red cloth, its pages worn but carefully preserved. She flipped it open and gasped. The words were written in her own handwriting. The girl walked into the woods, hoping to find what had been lost. She didn't know what she was searching for, but she knew it was there, hidden beneath the roots of the ancient tree. Aveline's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a story. This was hers. A story she had written long ago, when she was just a child, scribbling in her notebook by candlelight. A story she had forgotten, but now, here it was, alive in the pages of this book. She read further. But the tree did not answer. Instead, it whispered, "To find what you seek, you must first remember what you've left behind." Aveline's hands trembled as she turned the page. The story continued, describing the girl herself, perhaps venturing deeper into the forest, searching for a door that only appeared when the moon was full. A door to another world, to another time. A place where lost memories could be found and made whole again. This was more than a forgotten story. It was a map. A guide. She had written this as a child, not realizing how much it would come to mean. Not knowing that this story, this small, simple tale, held the key to unlocking everything she had lost. She closed the book and looked around. The room was vast, filled with shelves upon shelves of books that were waiting. Some had names written on their spines in ink she recognized. Others were blank, like the one she had first opened. Each book seemed to call to her, whispering its contents, waiting for her to choose it, to read it, to bring it to life. Aveline stepped deeper into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel it, the pull of the stories, the pull of the words. This was where it all started. The beginning of everything she had forgotten, everything she had lost. She pulled another book from the shelf. This one was different, a thick tome, bound in cracked black leather. The pages were yellowed, and the ink was faded, but the text was there. She began to read. In a distant land, under the shadow of an old castle, there was a girl who dreamt of flying. She would sit by the window, staring at the stars, imagining that one day, she would take flight and leave her world behind. She was a princess in her own right, but she knew that her heart belonged to the sky. Aveline stopped. Her breath caught in her throat again. This was another story. One she had written as a child. One that had always felt so distant, so impossible. But now, it was here. In front of her. The stories were hers. But they weren't just hers. They were waiting. The more she read, the more she realized that these stories weren't just hers, they were pieces of the world around her. They were fragments of dreams, of memories, of lives she had never lived but had always known. They were the echoes of everything that had been forgotten. And they were all waiting to be remembered. Aveline closed the book and stood. She had found the library, the place where all the stories were kept. The place where the lost things resided, patiently waiting for someone to come, to remember, and to bring them back to life. She had come for a reason. She had come to remember. To find what had been lost. But she had found something more. A library full of forgotten stories, waiting to be written again. Waiting to be shared. And now, it was her turn to write. Act 8, The Book of Forgotten Memories. Aveline stood amidst the rows of books, each one beckoning to her. The room seemed to breathe, filled with the quiet hum of whispered stories, waiting to be discovered. She had found a library, the place where lost memories were kept, but now she realized that it wasn't just a repository of the forgotten, it was a map. A map to her past, to pieces of herself she had left behind. Her fingers hovered over the books on the shelves. She reached for one that seemed to call to her, its leather cover worn and soft with age. The title was barely visible, faded by time. She opened it carefully, the pages crackling as they turned, revealing the first story. There was once a girl who dreamed of being a bird. She would watch them fly, their wings cutting through the air with a grace she could never replicate. She longed to join them, to soar above the world and leave all her worries behind. But the sky was far, and the ground was too heavy. The words hit her like a wave. She knew this story. She had written it long ago, but had forgotten all about it. The girl in the story was her, no doubt about it. Aveline had always felt the pull of the sky, a longing she couldn't explain. She had forgotten, but now, in the quiet of the library, the story returned to her. She turned the page. One day, she found a bird with a broken wing. She held it gently, feeling its fragile heartbeat against her palm. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes, to fly, you must first help those who are grounded. Aveline closed the book slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the pages. The memory had come back to her, vivid and sharp. She remembered the day she had found a wounded bird in the garden, how she had carefully tended to its injuries, feeling the weight of its fragile form in her hands. It had flown away eventually, but the memory had stayed with her. Now, it felt like a part of the story she had written long ago. But this was only the beginning. Aveline reached for another book, this one thicker, bound in deep blue cloth. She opened it, the pages whispering as they turned. The story inside was different, darker. In the depths of the forest, there was a house. The walls were made of stone, and the windows were covered with ivy. Inside, a girl sat alone, staring out at the world she had never known. She had been trapped there for as long as she could remember, her only companions the shadows that danced across the walls. Aveline's heart raced. This story was different. It felt heavier, as if it carried a burden she hadn't yet fully understood. The girl in the story wasn't just dreaming of escape, she was trapped. She kept reading. She had no memory of how she had come to be there, only that she longed to leave. The house was silent, but the walls whispered her name, a constant reminder of her isolation. And so she waited, hoping that one day, someone would find her and free her from the prison of her own mind. Aveline paused, her fingers resting on the page. This story was not hers. Or was it? She didn't remember being trapped, but the words felt familiar, like a part of her own history she had buried deep. She turned the page. One day, a stranger arrived at the door. He was tall, with eyes that seemed to see through the walls, through the very soul of the girl who had been waiting. He spoke softly, his voice a lullaby that seemed to echo in the empty house. "You are not trapped," he said, "you are only lost. And you have always had the key to escape." Aveline's breath caught in her throat. This story, the stranger felt like a riddle she hadn't solved. The idea of being trapped, of waiting for someone to come and free her, it stirred something inside her. Was it a memory of her own, or just a dream? She closed the book and set it down gently, her mind swirling with the weight of what she had just read. She needed answers. She needed to understand what this meant. As she moved through the library, another book caught her eye. It was thinner than the others, its pages yellowed and fragile. She pulled it from the shelf and opened it, her fingers trembling as she began to read. The girl stood before a mirror. She had seen it every day, but today, it was different. The reflection that stared back at her was not her own. It was someone else, someone she didn't recognize. She reached out to touch the glass, but the image was gone, replaced by her own face once more. Aveline felt a chill run down her spine. This story wasn't hers, but it felt like it had been written just for her. She had stood before mirrors, before windows, wondering who she truly was. The reflection, who was she really? She read on. The mirror whispered her name, Aveline. And in that moment, she realized she was both the one who had been lost, and the one who had been waiting. And only by seeing both could she truly find herself. Aveline's chest tightened. Her name. She had always felt like there were parts of herself she didn't understand, pieces that had been hidden from her. But the mirror, the stranger, the stories, they were all leading her back to herself. She closed the book, her fingers lingering on the cover. The answers were out there, waiting for her to find them. The library was vast, filled with forgotten stories and memories. And with each book, each story, she was unraveling the mystery of who she was. The journey was far from over. She had found the first piece. But there were many more to uncover. Act 9, The Path of Forgotten Roads. Aveline stood in the heart of the library, surrounded by the soft glow of the lanterns that hung from the rafters. The stories she had uncovered, stories of her past, of memories long buried, were still fresh in her mind, but something nagged at her. There was more. She could feel it. The library had given her glimpses into her forgotten past, but it hadn't yet revealed everything. The path ahead was still obscured by shadows, waiting to be uncovered. She turned away from the shelves, feeling the weight of the books she had read. Each one had brought a new piece of herself to light, but there were still too many pieces missing. The room seemed to pulse with quiet expectation, as if urging her to continue. Aveline made her way toward a narrow corridor that led deeper into the library. The walls here were lined with thick, leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked with age. She didn't know why she was drawn to this part of the room, but it felt right. As if this was where she was meant to go next. The air grew colder as she walked, the temperature dropping with every step. The further she went, the more the light seemed to dim, until she was standing in front of a heavy wooden door. It was unlike any she had seen in the library before. This door was older than the rest of the shelves, older than the books themselves. The wood was dark and weathered, the handle rusted from years of neglect. She reached for the handle, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. As soon as she touched it, the door creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire room. Beyond the door was a long, winding path, covered in thick vines and wildflowers, as if nature itself had taken over the space. Aveline stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The path she had been searching for. She stepped into the overgrown corridor, the door closing softly behind her. The walls of the library disappeared, replaced by an endless road that seemed to stretch out before her, winding through dense forests and dark, mist-covered valleys. The road was unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. It was as if she had walked it before, long ago, but had forgotten. The trees above her were ancient, their roots winding deep into the earth, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and rain. She walked. The further she went, the more she felt the presence of someone beside her. It wasn't a physical presence, but a feeling, a whisper in the back of her mind, urging her to continue. She reached a clearing, where the path split into two directions. One road led into the dark forest, its path shrouded in shadow. The other led to a hill, where a faint light could be seen in the distance. The choice was clear, but still, something tugged at her, pulling her toward the darker path. Aveline hesitated. There was something about the light that called to her. It was soft, warm, and inviting. But the shadowed path felt familiar. It felt like it was the road she had always known. She took a deep breath and stepped toward the darkness. The air grew thicker as she walked, the trees pressing closer around her. The road twisted and turned, the trees above blocking out the light. But she didn't stop. The further she went, the more the air seemed to hum with energy, as if the very earth beneath her feet was alive, breathing with her every step. She felt it now, a presence, a whisper on the wind. You've walked this path before, but you've forgotten. You've always known the way, but you've been too afraid to take the next step. The voice wasn't just in her ears. It was in her heart, in her soul, as if it had always been there, waiting for her to remember. The path narrowed as she walked, the trees closing in on either side, until she was standing at the edge of a cliff. Below her, a vast expanse of misty mountains stretched out into the horizon, their peaks lost in the clouds. The wind howled around her, and for a moment, she felt as though she might fall. But she didn't. She stood tall, feeling the ground beneath her feet solid and steady. And then, she saw it. At the base of the cliff, partially hidden by the fog, was a door. It was smaller than the one she had seen in the library, but it was made of the same dark wood, the same weathered material. The handle gleamed in the moonlight, just as it had before. It was a door to something else. Something beyond this world. Aveline stepped forward, her heart racing. As her fingers touched the handle, a familiar voice echoed in her mind. This is the door to your past. The door to your future. To find what was lost, you must first face what you've forgotten. She turned the handle, and the door opened with a soft sigh. Beyond it was a room she knew. A room she had visited long ago, but had forgotten. It was her childhood room, her bed, her books, the window that looked out into the garden. But this time, it was different. The room was older, worn with time, but the essence was the same. Everything was just as it had been. She stepped inside. And there, sitting in the center of the room, was a figure. Her younger self. Aveline froze. Her younger self looked up, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. The world seemed to fall away. Time seemed to stop. And then, the younger Aveline spoke. You've come back to remember. but you already knew the way. You've always known. It's time to finish what you started. Kietoi, nu on min se type tuc voi hoiten, the mirror of forgotten reflections, kai Aveline se doi dien voi chin min trong kuang van hung bian type theo ve qua ku tuo lo. Con gi I he han vi si de sao veo en hung dio chua tuok biet. Type tuc kong now. Sparkles. Act 10, The Mirror of Forgotten Reflections. Aveline stood in front of the mirror, her younger self staring back at her. The room around them seemed to blur, the edges of reality softening as though she were standing on the precipice of two worlds, one where memories lived, and one where they were lost forever. Her younger self looked so familiar, yet so distant. The face was hers, but there was something different about it. A calmness in the eyes, a kind of quiet wisdom that Aveline couldn't remember having at that age. You've come back, the younger Aveline said, her voice soft but filled with understanding. To find what was lost. To remember what you've forgotten. Aveline swallowed, her throat dry. She had so many questions, so many things she didn't understand. How was it possible for her younger self to be here? And why did it feel like the room, the mirror, the very air around her, was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen? I don't understand, Aveline said, her voice cracking slightly. What am I supposed to remember? What have I forgotten? The younger version of herself smiled, a smile that was gentle and knowing. You've forgotten the path. The one that leads back to who you truly are. You've been lost in the stories, in the memories, but they are not just stories. They are parts of you. Parts of your soul. Aveline reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the surface of the mirror. It was cold, smooth, and strangely comforting. She felt her reflection ripple beneath her fingertips, as if the mirror itself were alive. Why now? She whispered. Why do I remember now? The younger Aveline stepped closer, her expression serious. Because you were ready. You've spent so much time searching, so much time running from what you are, from what you've been. But you can't hide from yourself forever. The door you found, the path you walked has always been leading here. To this moment. Aveline's heart raced. The weight of the words settled over her like a blanket. You can't hide from yourself forever. What did that mean? Was she running from something? Had she been avoiding something all along? Her younger self continued, her voice steady and calm. The door you opened, the path you walked, they weren't just about finding answers. They were about facing yourself. The truth of who you are lies within you, Aveline. You've always known it. The mirror shimmered again, and for a moment, Aveline's reflection changed. She saw herself, but not as she was now, not as she had become. Instead, she saw the younger version of herself, the girl who had once looked at the world with wonder, with curiosity, without fear. The reflection shifted again, and this time, it was her older self, the woman who had lived through the years, who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She saw the child. She saw the adult. And in that moment, she realized they were both her. "Who am I?" Aveline asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who am I really?" The younger Aveline smiled again, her eyes filled with a deep, ancient understanding. "You are all of it. You are the child who dreamed, the adult who has lived, and the person you will become. But to understand who you are, you must first forgive who you've been." Aveline's breath caught in her throat. Forgive who she had been. What did that mean? What had she done that needed forgiveness? The reflection in the mirror began to change once more. This time, it wasn't just her face she saw. It was the faces of those who had come before her, the ones whose stories had shaped her. Her grandmother, her mother, the people who had been a part of her life, all standing beside her in the reflection. They weren't just memories, they were part of her, too. "They are part of me," Aveline whispered, realization dawning. "All of them." "Yes," her younger self said softly. "And it's time to honor them. To remember them, not as separate parts of your past, but as pieces of your soul. The mirror is not just a reflection of who you are. It is a reflection of who you've always been. Of the stories, the people, the places, and the dreams that live inside you." Aveline closed her eyes, and for a moment, the room fell silent. The weight of it all settled over her, every moment, every memory, every face that had come before. They weren't just ghosts. They were the foundation of who she had become, and the blueprint of who she was meant to be. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was clear again. The reflection was no longer shifting. It was her. The child. The adult. The woman. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel lost. "I remember," Aveline said quietly, her voice strong. "I remember who I am." The younger Aveline nodded, her expression soft and content. "You've always known. Now you can move forward. The stories you've uncovered, the memories you've found, they are just the beginning. The path is yours to walk." Aveline turned away from the mirror, feeling the weight of the knowledge she had uncovered. She knew now that her journey wasn't just about finding answers. It was about understanding herself, embracing all of who she was, and honoring the paths that had led her here. She stepped away from the mirror, her heart light and full, and began to walk forward. The room was no longer a place of shadows. It was a place of light, a place where she could finally see herself clearly. And the road ahead, full of stories yet to be written, was waiting for her. Act 11, The Journey Beyond the Mirror. Aveline stepped away from the mirror, her reflection still lingering in her mind, the image of the child, the adult, and the woman, each a part of her, each a part of her journey. The weight that had pressed on her chest seemed lighter now, the fog in her mind beginning to clear. She had walked a long path, one filled with uncertainty and loss, but now, for the first time, she felt grounded. She felt whole. The room around her shimmered for a moment, as though the air itself was shifting, and then the walls seemed to fade. She was no longer standing in the quiet, still room with the mirror. She was standing at the edge of a vast landscape, a world she didn't recognize, yet somehow, it felt familiar. Before her stretched a long path, winding through rolling hills, ancient trees, and mountains that seemed to stretch far beyond the horizon. The path seemed to beckon her, inviting her to step forward. Her heart beat with a new rhythm, steady and sure. This was her journey. The one she had always been meant to take. She stepped forward. The ground beneath her feet felt firm, yet the world around her was alive, humming with energy. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the sky above her was the color of deep twilight, streaked with hints of lavender and gold. The landscape seemed to pulse with life, as though it were breathing along with her. Aveline walked, her steps sure, her mind open. As she walked, she could hear whispers in the wind. Not words, but feelings, emotions that filled the air, like echoes of forgotten songs, like the hum of a melody lost to time. She walked for what felt like hours, yet the landscape around her never seemed to change. It was as if she had entered a place outside of time, a place where memories and dreams intertwined. Eventually, she reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone archway, its surface covered in moss and ivy. The archway was old, ancient, but it radiated a quiet power. Aveline approached it slowly, her hand reaching for the stone. It felt warm to the touch, as though it were alive, pulsing with energy. She stepped through. On the other side, the landscape changed again. She found herself standing in a vast library. But this wasn't just any library. The shelves stretched far above her, beyond what the eye could see, filled with books of every kind. Some were ancient, their pages yellowed with age, others were newer, their spines unmarked by time. But all of them, in some way, felt connected. Each book seemed to hum with energy, as if it contained a piece of her past, her memories, her stories. Aveline walked through the aisles, her fingers brushing against the spines of the books. She could feel them calling to her, each one a whisper in the back of her mind. She had always known that the answers she sought were hidden in the stories, in the pages of the past. And now, in this place, those stories were waiting for her to discover them. She reached for a book on the nearest shelf. The cover was dark, almost black, with a single silver thread running across it. She opened it. Inside was a single line, written in elegant script. The journey is not just about finding the way. It is about remembering the path you've already walked. Aveline's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a story. This was her journey. Her path. The one she had already walked, the one she had forgotten. She flipped through the pages, and as she did, the words began to shift. The story unfolded before her eyes, not in linear time, but in fragments, memories, moments, glimpses of her life. The story began with a child, standing at the edge of a field, watching the sky change color as the sun set. The child was her. And in that moment, Aveline saw herself not just as she was now, but as she had been, as she had always been. The pages turned, showing her moments of joy, moments of pain, moments of quiet reflection. Each page was a chapter of her life, a piece of who she was, who she had been, and who she was becoming. And then, as she reached the final page, she found herself standing before the mirror again. But this time, it wasn't a reflection of who she was. It was a reflection of who she would become. The mirror shimmered, showing Aveline not just as the person she had known herself to be, but as someone stronger, someone more complete. It was as if the mirror was showing her the future, the woman she was becoming, the person who had already begun to heal. She smiled. The mirror wasn't just a reflection of her past. It was a map of her future, a future where she was whole, where the pieces of her life came together. Aveline stepped away from the mirror, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She had walked this path before. She had always known it. And now, she was ready to walk it again. The landscape around her began to shift once more, the library fading away, the stone archway disappearing into the mist. But Aveline didn't feel lost. She didn't feel uncertain. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to embrace it fully. To walk forward, to remember what she had forgotten, and to become the person she was always meant to be. She took a deep breath and stepped forward into the unknown. The path was hers to walk. Act 12, The Horizon of New Beginnings. Aveline walked forward, her steps light, yet purposeful, as the world around her shifted and swirled. The mist that had lingered seemed to dissipate, parting like a curtain being drawn back to reveal something new. A fresh wind filled the air, crisp and invigorating, carrying the scent of earth and new growth. She felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time, as if every breath she took was infused with possibility. The road before her stretched out, winding through lush forests, rolling hills, and open fields. The landscape was vast, like a blank canvas, waiting to be painted with the stories and memories she was about to create. She could hear the distant call of birds, the rustling of leaves, the gentle murmur of a stream flowing nearby. It was a symphony of nature, a melody that spoke to her soul, telling her that this was the beginning of something new. Aveline stopped for a moment, looking around. The world was still, but it felt full of potential. It was as if the very ground beneath her feet was offering her a choice to continue down this path of self-discovery or to turn back. But she knew there was no turning back. She had come too far. The mirror had shown her who she had been, who she was, and who she was meant to be. Now, it was time to embrace it fully. She looked ahead, where the path seemed to lead toward a distant mountain range. The peaks were shrouded in mist, but the sun was just beginning to rise behind them, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. The light seemed to beckon her forward, urging her to take the next step. With a deep breath, Aveline continued walking, her eyes focused on the horizon. She felt lighter now, as if the weight of the past had been lifted, and all that remained was the journey ahead. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew it was where she was meant to go. As she walked, the path began to change. The ground became softer, the grass thicker, and the trees more dense. It was as if she were entering a new world, one that was both familiar and strange. The air felt different here, heavy with the scent of flowers she had never smelled before. The sky above was a deep shade of blue, with wisps of clouds drifting lazily by. She paused for a moment, letting the beauty of the world sink in. The sound of a nearby stream caught her attention, and she followed it, stepping carefully over the moss-covered rocks that lined the water's edge. The stream wound its way through the forest, its waters sparkling in the sunlight, inviting her to follow. Aveline crouched by the water, dipping her fingers into the cool stream. The sensation was soothing, grounding her in the present moment. As she watched the water flow, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was the beginning of something new, a fresh start. But as she sat there, something caught her eye, a glimmer beneath the water's surface. She leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. It was a small object, half buried in the mud, but it shimmered with an otherworldly light. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface, and pulled it free. It was a small, silver key. Aveline held it up, turning it over in her fingers. It was delicate, intricate, with symbols etched along its length, symbols she didn't recognize but felt an odd connection to. The key seemed familiar, as if it had been waiting for her. She didn't know what it unlocked, but she knew it was important. Without thinking, she tucked the key into her satchel and stood. The path before her beckoned again, urging her forward. She didn't know where it would lead, but she felt an undeniable pull to continue. This was the beginning of something new. The horizon of new beginnings had opened up before her, and she was ready to walk toward it. The world seemed to shift again, as if acknowledging her decision. The air was warmer now, the sunlight brighter, and the trees whispered in the wind. Aveline smiled to herself, feeling the weight of her journey settle into her bones. She had come so far, and yet, there was still so much to discover. As she continued walking, the road stretched out before her, winding through the forest and into the mountains beyond. The sky above was a canvas of gold and purple, the sun dipping low on the horizon as evening approached. But Aveline wasn't tired. She wasn't lost. She was where she was meant to be. And with each step, she felt the pieces of her past, present, and future coming together. She had found her way. She had found herself. And now, the journey was just beginning. Act 13, The Door of New Discoveries. Aveline walked deeper into the wilderness, each step feeling more certain than the last. The world around her, with its vibrant colors and gentle hum of nature, was a mirror of her own inner transformation. She had left behind the safety of the library, the mirror, and the familiar paths of her past, and now she was forging her own way forward. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, Aveline felt the pull of something new, a shift in the very air around her. The path before her was still winding, but the trees had begun to grow thicker, their branches reaching out like fingers, drawing her towards something hidden within the forest's heart. The landscape had changed once more, transforming from wide, open fields to a dense, mysterious wood that seemed to pulse with its own life. The further she walked, the more the atmosphere shifted. The birds no longer sang, instead, the sounds of the forest took on a more ancient quality, as if she were stepping into a place where time itself was forgotten. The air was cooler here, and the scent of pine and moss filled her senses, grounding her in this new space. And then, she saw it. Ahead, in a clearing surrounded by tall, twisted trees, was a door. It stood alone, framed by ivy and thick vines, its surface worn and weathered by time. It was unlike any door she had encountered before. There were no handles, no locks, just an intricate pattern of symbols carved into the wood, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The door seemed to pulse with an energy she couldn't quite understand, but it felt inviting. It called to her, a quiet whisper in her mind urging her to approach. Aveline stepped forward, her heart racing in anticipation. The key she had found earlier, still nestled safely in her satchel, seemed to stir at her side, as if it too sensed the significance of this moment. She reached out and touched the door. The wood was warm, like it had been waiting for her. And as her fingers brushed against it, the symbols shifted and rearranged, forming a new pattern, a new map. The door was not a barrier, it was a gateway. And she was meant to pass through it. Aveline didn't hesitate. She inserted the key into the lock that had now appeared in the center of the door, and it turned with a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit passage beyond. Without thinking, Aveline stepped through. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted again. The air grew warmer, the trees taller, and the path beneath her feet seemed to become smoother, as if the land itself was welcoming her into this new realm. The passage stretched out before her, winding through a forest unlike any she had seen before. The trees here were massive, their trunks wide and gnarled, their leaves shimmering with a silver hue. The ground was covered with a soft, mossy carpet, and delicate flowers bloomed in the shade, their petals glowing faintly in the dim light. Aveline walked forward, her senses alive with the energy of this new place. The forest was quiet, but there was a feeling of watching eyes of ancient spirits, guardians of this place, waiting for her to discover what lay hidden within. She followed the path until she came to a large clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous tree, its roots stretching deep into the earth and its branches reaching toward the sky like the arms of an ancient god. The tree glowed with a soft, golden light, and at its base, a stone pedestal stood, holding a large, open book. Aveline approached the pedestal, her heart racing. This was it. The discovery she had been waiting for. She knew it instinctively. She reached for the book, the pages fluttering as she opened it. The words inside were written in an elegant, flowing script, but the language was unfamiliar. As her fingers brushed over the text, the letters began to shift, rearranging themselves into a language she understood. The words began to reveal a story of a girl, long ago, who had walked this very path. The girl had come to this tree, seeking answers, just as Aveline had. She had discovered the truth of her past, her future, and the magic that flowed through the world, connecting all living things. The book's pages turned on their own, as though guided by some unseen hand. Aveline read, her heart pounding as the story unfolded before her. The girl in the story was like her, but different. She had been lost, searching for something she couldn't name, just as Aveline had been. But the key to the door had always been there, waiting for her to find it. And when she did, she had unlocked the truth of who she was, and who she was meant to be. Aveline closed the book, her mind reeling with the implications. This was her story too. She had been searching for answers, for meaning, and now, she had found them. The path had led her here, to this moment, where she was finally ready to understand the truth of her existence. She wasn't just a girl lost in a world of memories, she was part of something greater, something timeless, something that connected her to the very fabric of the universe. She stood up, feeling the weight of the book in her hands. The tree before her shimmered, its golden light intensifying as if it were acknowledging her discovery. The forest around her seemed to come alive, the leaves rustling softly in the breeze, the flowers swaying in rhythm. Aveline took a deep breath. She wasn't lost anymore. She had found her place in the world, her path, her purpose. And with that, she knew the journey was far from over. The door she had opened had led her to this discovery, but there were more doors ahead. More truths to uncover, more paths to follow. And she was ready to walk them. Act 14, The Key to Infinite Paths. Aveline stood at the base of the great tree, its golden light still flickering around her like a beacon. The book she had found lay heavy in her hands, its pages filled with the wisdom of ages. But as she looked at the tree, the world around her seemed to shift once more, as if acknowledging the new chapter of her journey that was about to begin. The forest around her was alive with energy, the air crackling with possibilities. She could feel it, the pull of something deeper, something beyond the story she had just uncovered. The path ahead wasn't just a straight road anymore. It was a multitude of paths, each leading somewhere unknown, each offering a new discovery, a new choice. The golden light from the tree flickered again, and suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled, like the earth was waking up. A low hum resonated through the air, and before Aveline could react, a shimmering door appeared before her. It was unlike any door she had seen before. This one was ethereal, made of light, its edges constantly shifting and flowing like liquid gold. The door had no frame, no handle, just an opening that pulsed with energy. Aveline stepped closer, feeling the heat from the door radiate toward her. She instinctively reached for the key she had found in the stream, the silver key now warm against her palm. The moment her fingers touched it, the key glowed brightly, and a soft click echoed in the air. The door opened. Beyond the threshold was a world she couldn't have imagined, a vast expanse of light and shadow, of endless horizons and countless paths stretching out before her. The air was filled with the scent of rain, of wet earth, and something sweet, like jasmine. Aveline stepped through the door, and as she did, she felt the weight of all the paths before her. There were so many possibilities, each road leading to something different, something new. The paths were not just physical roads, they were choices. Choices she could make. Choices that would shape her future. She looked around, feeling a deep sense of awe and wonder. This world was a place of infinite possibilities, each one waiting for her to explore. The trees, the fields, the rivers, all of them were pathways, not just through space, but through time, through memory, through her own heart and mind. Aveline could see the faint outlines of other travelers in the distance, figures walking along different paths, each with their own journey. Some of them were familiar, like the echoes of her past. Others were strangers, like versions of herself, versions she had not yet become. Her heart raced. The key she held wasn't just for opening doors. It was a symbol of choice, of potential. It wasn't about finding a single destination, it was about finding the right path at the right time. The landscape around her shifted, like the world was alive, breathing with her every movement. The paths she saw were not fixed. They were fluid, changing with each step, with each decision. Some paths were bathed in light, some cloaked in shadow, but each path led somewhere. Each path would reveal a piece of the world she had yet to uncover. Aveline walked forward, her feet light, her heart steady. She didn't need to know where each path would lead. She didn't need to know what lay at the end. What mattered was that she was walking. That she was moving towards something new, something she had yet to discover about herself. She reached a fork in the road, where two paths diverged in different directions. One path was bathed in golden light, the other shrouded in deep blue shadows. Each road was inviting, each one offering something different. The golden path shimmered with warmth, like a memory of a dream. The blue path, though darker, felt familiar, as though it held the key to an old story that had yet to be told. Aveline paused. She could feel the pull of both paths, but she knew she had to choose. The golden path beckoned her with its warmth, its light. It whispered of hope, of new beginnings, of everything she had yet to create. The blue path, on the other hand, whispered of forgotten truths, of past wounds, of the stories she had buried deep within herself. Aveline took a deep breath and stepped onto the blue path. As she walked, she felt the cool air wrap around her like a blanket. The path was quiet, peaceful, yet filled with a deep sense of knowing. The trees on either side seemed to lean closer, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. With every step, Aveline felt herself getting closer to something, closer to a truth she had not yet uncovered. The path was winding, twisting, but it was leading her somewhere important. The deeper she went, the more she felt the pull of the past. She saw glimpses of memories, flickers of moments long forgotten passing by her like reflections in the water. Each memory brought a feeling, a flash of understanding. She didn't know where this path would end, but she knew it would reveal something she had been searching for. And then, at the end of the path, she saw it. A door, just like the one she had seen before. It stood tall, its frame made of light, but this time, it wasn't just an opening. This door was a mirror. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the door. The mirror shimmered, and her reflection appeared, her face, her body, but something was different. The reflection smiled. It wasn't her. Not exactly. It was the person she was becoming. Aveline smiled back. The door opened, and she stepped through. Act 15, The World Beyond the Door. Aveline stepped through the mirror door, her heart beating faster with anticipation. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted again. The ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse, as though the very earth was alive, welcoming her to this new place. She found herself standing in a vast, open landscape, endless fields stretching out in every direction, their colors shifting with the changing light. The sky above was an ever-changing canvas, filled with swirling clouds and brilliant streaks of color that seemed to dance and shift with her movements. It was a world unlike any she had ever known, both alien and familiar at once. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers, and the ground beneath her feet was soft and warm, like it had been waiting for her. Ahead of her stood a towering mountain range, their peaks lost in the swirling clouds. The mountains felt distant, mysterious, as though they held secrets that had been buried for centuries. And between her and the mountains lay an endless path, long and winding, disappearing into the horizon. Aveline took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the journey before her. She had crossed through the door, stepped into this new world, but she knew this was only the beginning. There was more to discover, more to uncover, and more to understand. The path before her was wide and inviting, but it was also filled with uncertainty. Each step could lead to something new, something unknown. But she wasn't afraid. She had faced her past, understood who she was, and now it was time to face what lay ahead. She began to walk. The landscape around her shifted with every step, as though the world itself was responding to her movements. The fields gave way to dense forests, their trees towering above her like ancient guardians. The path twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the heart of this strange world. The air grew cooler, and the sound of distant water could be heard, like a gentle stream flowing somewhere in the distance. Aveline followed the path, her steps steady, her mind clear. She knew that whatever this world held, she was ready. She had the key to the journey, and she had the courage to face whatever came next. As she walked, the path began to narrow, the trees growing thicker, their branches intertwining above her head. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The air felt thick with mystery, and Aveline could sense that she was being watched not by eyes, but by the land itself, as though the world was aware of her presence. Then, just as she thought the path would lead her into the heart of the forest, it opened up into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large, stone archway, ancient, worn, and covered in ivy. The archway glowed with an eerie light, as though it were both a doorway and a warning. Aveline approached the archway, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of it. This was no ordinary door. It wasn't a passage from one place to another, it was a challenge, a test of her resolve. She reached out and touched the stone. It was cold to the touch, but it hummed with energy, as if it were alive. The moment her fingers made contact with the arch, a voice echoed in her mind. To pass through, you must face your deepest fear. Only then will you understand the path ahead. The voice was not human. It was ancient, timeless. A warning. A call to confront something she had long buried within herself. Aveline closed her eyes. She didn't need to think hard to know what her fear was. She had faced many fears in her life: loss, uncertainty, the weight of her past, but this was different. This fear wasn't just about failure or fear of the unknown. It was about facing herself. The reflection in the mirror, the truth she had seen. Had she truly accepted it? Had she truly accepted everything about herself? The mistakes, the choices, the regrets. Aveline took a deep breath and stepped through the archway, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted once more. The trees, the sky, the air, all of it dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of color and light. She felt herself falling, tumbling through the vast unknown. Her body was weightless, as though she were being pulled by something greater than herself. And then, with a sudden jolt, everything stopped. Aveline found herself standing in a familiar place, her childhood home. The house was the same as she remembered, but everything felt different now. The walls were covered in dust, the air stale with time. The place had been abandoned, left to decay, just like the memories she had pushed aside. She stood in the hallway, staring at the door to the living room. The door she had never been able to open as a child. The door that had always been locked. She knew what was behind it. It wasn't just a room, it was the place where everything had changed. Where the pain had started. Where the pieces of her past had been hidden away, locked behind that door. The voice from the archway echoed again. To move forward, you must open the door. Aveline walked toward it, her steps slow but sure. She reached for the doorknob, and this time, it turned easily under her hand. The door opened with a creak, revealing the room inside. It was empty. But the emptiness was filled with something else, something she had been avoiding for so long. She stepped inside, and the room flooded with light. It wasn't a place of darkness or fear. It was simply a place of truth. And in that truth, she could see herself, the child she had been, the woman she had become, and the woman she was still becoming. She smiled, the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. The door had been a test, but it had also been a revelation. Aveline wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready to embrace the unknown, to continue her journey, to discover the path that awaited her. The light from the room surrounded her, and the door behind her closed softly. The next step was waiting. The world beyond the door had always been hers to explore. And now, she was ready to walk it. Act 16, The Realm of Endless Possibilities. Aveline stood in the center of the glowing room, her heart beating steadily as the light enveloped her. The door behind her had closed, but ahead, the world had transformed again, this time, into something far grander, more expansive than anything she had ever known. The air was thick with possibilities, each breath she took carrying the promise of something new. Before her stretched an endless horizon, but this time, it wasn't a vast empty space. It was a realm, a world, alive with energy. The sky shimmered with iridescent colors, streaks of violet, turquoise, and gold swirling like the fabric of a dream. Below, the ground was soft, almost ethereal, like walking on clouds, yet it held her firmly. As she walked, the landscape shifted around her. Trees with branches that reached toward the sky like the arms of giants, their trunks covered in shimmering leaves. Rivers that sparkled like liquid starlight. Floating islands that drifted lazily above her head, their peaks crowned with bright flowers that bloomed in every color imaginable. It was a realm of endless possibilities. A place where the boundaries between dreams and reality blurred, where anything was possible. And Aveline felt it deeply, a sense of freedom, of potential, as if the world itself was waiting for her to make a choice, to carve her path through this endless expanse. She moved forward, her senses alive with the beauty around her. Each step she took seemed to bring a new discovery, a new corner of this world she had never seen before. It was as though the realm was shifting with her every thought, responding to her desires, her questions, her dreams. The path before her seemed to stretch out infinitely, but she knew there was a purpose to it. She wasn't just wandering aimlessly. Every step was leading her to something she could not yet see, but could feel deep inside. As she walked, the sound of footsteps behind her made her pause. She turned, and there, emerging from the shimmering fog, was a figure. It was a man, tall and cloaked in a flowing robe made of the same shifting light that filled the sky. His face was obscured by the hood, but his presence was undeniable. He radiated power and wisdom, like someone who had seen the beginning of time and the end of all things. "You have arrived," the figure said, his voice deep and resonant, like the echo of a distant thunderstorm. "The realm has been waiting for you." Aveline felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something familiar about him, something that made her feel both uneasy and comforted at the same time. She instinctively reached for the key she had found earlier, the silver key that had guided her through every door and every step of this journey. The figure's eyes hidden beneath the hood seemed to glow faintly as he spoke again. "The key you hold is not just a key to doors," he said, his tone almost like a whisper. "It is a key to your soul. A key to the very essence of who you are, who you were, and who you will become." Aveline looked at the key, her fingers tightening around it. She could feel its power, the hum of energy that had been with her from the moment she had found it, the way it seemed to resonate with her very being. "Who are you?" Aveline asked, her voice steady despite the overwhelming presence of the figure. The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements graceful, fluid, like a shadow gliding across the ground. He raised one hand, and with a simple motion, the realm around them shifted. The sky above them deepened into a rich purple, and the ground beneath Aveline's feet transformed into a vast sea of shifting sand. The winds picked up, swirling around them, carrying the scent of far-off lands and distant shores. Aveline felt her heart race. She was no longer in the same place. The landscape had changed again, but this time, it felt different. More real, somehow. More tangible. "This is the realm of endless possibilities," the figure said, his voice carrying over the winds. "But even in a place where anything can happen, there are choices to be made. Every path you take will lead you to new places, new truths. But be careful, for not all choices will bring you closer to your goal. Some paths will lead you to forgotten memories. Others will lead you to things you may not be ready to confront." Aveline's gaze shifted to the horizon, where countless paths stretched before her, each one winding and twisting in different directions. She could feel the weight of the decision ahead of her. She had come so far, but she knew now that the next step would be the most important one. "Where do I go now?" she asked, the question heavy with the uncertainty that lingered in her heart. The figure stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "That is for you to decide," he said. "The key you hold will guide you, but it is your heart that will lead the way. The choices are yours to make. And in making them, you will find what you seek." Aveline looked at the figure, his words echoing in her mind. The key, her heart, her choices. They were all connected. And she knew, deep down, that this moment, this choice would define the next stage of her journey. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, toward the vast horizon before her. She didn't know where the path would lead, but she knew that it was hers to walk. The key in her hand pulsed with energy, its light guiding her forward, illuminating the path ahead. The realm of endless possibilities was before her, and Aveline was ready to embrace whatever came next. Act 17, The Choice of the Heart. Aveline's footsteps echoed in the shifting sands beneath her, each grain of dust carrying with it the weight of countless possibilities. The winds howled around her, pulling at the edges of her cloak, yet there was something calming about the way the air embraced her, like the universe itself was urging her forward. She had crossed into the realm of endless possibilities, a world where every path was a new adventure, and every choice led to an unknown fate. The figure still cloaked in that shimmering robe of light watched her closely from the edge of the sandy expanse, his expression unreadable beneath his hood. His words still rang in her mind, the challenge he had presented, the weight of the choices that lay ahead. But Aveline was no longer afraid. No longer hesitant. The key she held in her hand hummed softly with energy, its light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She had felt its power from the very beginning, its presence a reminder that she was not walking this path alone. There was something larger at work, something guiding her, even as the landscape shifted and changed with every step she took. The path ahead was divided into countless directions. Every road seemed to offer something different, a unique promise, a potential destination. Some were bathed in warm golden light, others cloaked in shadow, while some seemed to disappear into an endless fog. It was overwhelming, yet in some strange way, it was also thrilling. This was the freedom she had longed for, the freedom to choose, to carve her own destiny. But there was a nagging feeling deep within her chest, a tug of uncertainty, like an invisible force pulling her in multiple directions at once. Every step she took felt like a decision, every thought a question. She could feel the weight of each choice, the significance of each path before her. Each road held a promise, but with that promise came the potential for loss, for regret. Which path will you choose, Aveline? The figure's voice broke through her thoughts, low and steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. Aveline turned to face him, her heart racing. I don't know, she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. Every path seems right, and yet none of them do. How do I know which one is the right one for me? The figure stepped closer, his movements fluid and graceful, like the wind itself. He raised his hand, and the sands around them began to shift, swirling like a storm. The ground beneath Aveline's feet trembled, and she watched, mesmerized, as the paths before her started to change. The roads twisted and turned, their directions altering, their destinations shifting, as if the world itself was responding to her uncertainty. He spoke again, his voice softer this time, almost like a whisper. The path you walk is not set in stone. It is shaped by your heart, your choices, your beliefs. Every step you take creates the road you walk upon. And every choice you make has the power to change everything. Aveline stood still, feeling the weight of his words press down on her. The wind stilled for a moment, and she was left standing in a quiet, introspective silence. It wasn't just about the road she took, it was about how she walked it. The choices she made along the way would shape not only her journey, but also the world she encountered. The key in her hand was not just a symbol of her past, it was a tool for shaping her future. But how do I know which road to take? She asked, her voice breaking the silence. How can I be sure that I'm making the right choice? The figure stepped even closer, his eyes glowing faintly beneath his hood. The answer lies within you, Aveline. It always has. The heart knows the way. It always has. Trust yourself. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The heart. Aveline's heart had guided her through this journey, through every twist and turn, through every challenge and discovery. And now, as the crossroads loomed before her, it was time to listen. Time to trust. Aveline closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She could feel her heartbeat in her chest, steady and strong. In that moment, she understood. It wasn't about finding the right path, it was about following the path that resonated with who she was, who she had always been, and who she was becoming. With newfound clarity, Aveline opened her eyes and looked at the paths before her. The golden road, bathed in light, called to her. It spoke of new beginnings, of growth, and discovery. It promised warmth, security, and the joy of new experiences. But the darkened path, shrouded in shadows, held a different pull. It whispered of old memories, of buried truths and forgotten fears. It spoke of confronting the past, of understanding what had been lost, and finding the strength to move forward despite the weight of what was left behind. And then there was the foggy path, the one that seemed to disappear into the unknown. It wasn't as clear, but it felt like the most mysterious. It called to her with a quiet, subtle voice, asking her to step into the unknown, to embrace the uncertainty and explore what lay beyond. Aveline stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of each choice, each path. But this time, there was no hesitation in her heart. She knew which path she had to take. She had to trust herself, trust her heart. The golden path, bright and inviting, felt too easy, too familiar. Aveline had walked the road of light before. It was time to face the shadows, to confront what had been buried inside her. She needed to understand her past before she could fully embrace her future. With a steady breath, Aveline took the first step onto the darkened path. As she did, the air around her seemed to shift, the shadows deepening as she walked. The wind howled once more, but this time, it didn't feel like a threat, it felt like an invitation. The shadows were not enemies, they were part of her, part of the journey she had to take. She could hear the distant echo of her own voice in the wind, the whispers of her past calling her forward. The figure in the distance watched her for a moment, his form fading into the fog. "Remember," he said, his voice carried by the wind, "the heart knows the way. Trust it." Aveline nodded to herself, her heart steady and true. The path ahead was unclear, but she was ready to walk it. Whatever the future held, she would face it head on, knowing that with every choice, every step, she was creating her own destiny. And so, with a heart full of trust and a spirit full of determination, Aveline continued down the darkened path, ready to face the past, embrace the present, and carve her future from the endless possibilities before her. Act 18, The Confrontation of Shadows. Aveline walked further into the darkness, the cool air of the shadowed path wrapping around her like a cloak. The wind that had once been a gentle guide now howled in her ears, as if urging her forward, but with a sense of urgency that she couldn't ignore. Every step she took seemed to echo, as though the very earth beneath her was calling out, questioning her resolve. The shadows around her grew thicker, darker. The light of the world seemed to fade with every step, and the world became nothing more than a blur of black and gray, swirling in the wind. She felt herself becoming lost in it, the thick, suffocating dark. The further she walked, the more the weight of the past pressed against her chest. It was as if the shadows themselves were memories, fragments of her life that she had long buried, forgotten, and left behind. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the darkness was pulling her deeper into itself, wanting to consume her, to drown her in the weight of all she had run from. But Aveline wasn't running anymore. She had spent her life running from her past, from the truths that haunted her, from the feelings she had pushed aside, never allowing herself to truly face them. But now, standing in the heart of this shadowed world, she knew that she could run no longer. She had come to face these shadows. She had come to confront the parts of herself that she had long avoided. The path twisted, and the air grew colder, more oppressive. But in the distance, Aveline saw a faint light, a flicker of warmth in the darkness. It was small, but it was there. A soft, golden glow, cutting through the blackness like a beacon. She felt drawn to it. As if the light called to her, beckoning her forward, offering her something she had been searching for, even if she hadn't known it. With renewed determination, she pushed forward. The light grew brighter with every step. It seemed to pulse, rhythmically, as if alive. And then, as Aveline reached the edge of the clearing, she stopped. There, in the center of the light, stood a figure. It was a woman, tall and regal, her figure illuminated by the golden glow. Her hair was long and silver, flowing like a waterfall of moonlight, and her eyes glowed faintly with the same golden light that surrounded her. She was beautiful, but there was something unsettling about her, something familiar yet strange, as if Aveline had seen her before. "Who are you?" Aveline whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. The woman smiled softly, a knowing smile that seemed to pierce through the very core of Aveline's being. "I am you, Aveline," she said, her voice smooth and calm, yet carrying the power of centuries. "I am the version of you that you have long feared. The version of you that you have buried beneath layers of doubt and shame. The version you refuse to face." Aveline's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to step back, to turn away, but her feet were rooted to the ground. She couldn't move. The woman her was staring directly at her, with eyes that seemed to see into her very soul, unraveling the secrets that Aveline had spent so long hiding. "I don't understand," Aveline whispered, her voice shaking. "What do you mean? How can you be me?" The woman took a step forward, her presence filling the space around them. The light from her body flickered, casting strange, elongated shadows on the ground. "I am the part of you that you refuse to acknowledge," she said softly. "The part that holds all your fears, your regrets, your pain. The part you think you have overcome, but that has always been with you, hidden in the darkness." Aveline took a shaky step backward, but the woman followed her, moving with a grace and power that Aveline could not understand. "You are me," the woman continued, her voice growing stronger. "You are the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of being unworthy. You are the girl who was never good enough, who was never loved enough, who was never strong enough. You are the pain of the past, the weight of all the memories that you have tried to bury deep within yourself." Aveline shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. That's not true. I'm not like that. I've moved on. I've faced my fears. The woman smiled, and this time, there was no warmth in it. You think you've moved on, she said coldly. But you've been running from yourself your entire life. You've buried your feelings, your pain, your doubts, but they've never gone away. They've been here, in the shadows, waiting for you to face them. Aveline trembled, her mind swirling with confusion and fear. This wasn't just some stranger, this was her. This was the version of herself that she had tried so hard to escape, the version of herself that she had denied, the version of herself she had feared to confront. The woman stepped closer, her golden eyes piercing through Aveline. It's time to face me, she said softly, almost lovingly. It's time to face the part of you that you have been running from. Only then can you move forward. Only then can you truly become who you are meant to be. Aveline's breath quickened as the realization hit her. This wasn't just a confrontation with a figure in the dark. It was a confrontation with her own shadow. With the parts of herself that she had hidden away, that she had refused to acknowledge for so long. She closed her eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on her. But then, something inside her shifted. A small, quiet voice whispered within her mind. You are not your fear. You are not your pain. You are not the darkness. You are the light. Aveline opened her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. The woman before her was not a monster, not an enemy. She was part of her just as every shadow, every doubt, every fear was a part of her. But they didn't define her. With a deep breath, Aveline stepped forward. I am not you, she said, her voice steady and firm. I am more than my fears. I am more than my pain. I am whole. The woman stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. And then, slowly, the light around her began to fade, the shadows dissipating, and the woman herself seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving only the golden glow behind. Aveline stood there, her heart racing, her body trembling, but for the first time, she felt light. She had confronted the darkness, the shadows of her past, and she had overcome them. The fear that had held her captive for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of strength and clarity that she had never known. The path ahead, though still uncertain, no longer seemed daunting. Aveline had faced herself. And in doing so, she had unlocked the true power within her. With renewed determination, she turned and walked forward, the golden light from the horizon beckoning her onward. The journey was far from over, but now, Aveline knew that she was ready. Ready to face whatever lay ahead, to embrace the unknown, and to walk the path that was hers to create. Act 19, The Awakening of the True Self. The world around Aveline shifted once more, the light of the horizon growing brighter, the path in front of her stretching out like a ribbon of possibility. She had faced the darkness within herself, the shadow that had haunted her for so long, and now, with each step forward, she felt the weight of that burden lift from her shoulders. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty gone. But what remained was something new, something stronger, something that she had always carried within her, but had never fully embraced until now. She had awakened. The world ahead was still vast and unknown, but now, Aveline walked with the confidence of someone who had faced the deepest parts of herself and emerged victorious. The key in her hand, warm and pulsing with energy, no longer felt like a simple object. It was a symbol of her strength, her power, her journey. And as she held it, she knew that it would guide her, just as it had from the very beginning. But even with her newfound strength, Aveline knew that the journey was far from over. She had unlocked a part of herself, but there were still many doors to open, many truths to uncover. The realm of endless possibilities lay before her, and each path was a new challenge, a new opportunity to explore who she truly was and what she was capable of. The path ahead curved toward a dense forest, its trees towering above her, their branches stretching like fingers to the sky. The air grew cooler as she entered the forest, the light dimming as the thick canopy above blocked out the sun. The silence in the air was almost suffocating, but Aveline was undeterred. She had faced her inner darkness, and now, the outer world seemed like just another challenge, another place to discover. As she walked, she felt a strange pull, a sensation deep in her chest that urged her to keep moving forward. The path was winding, the trees thick with ancient bark, and the ground uneven beneath her feet. But there was something about this forest, something familiar, something that felt like it was calling her, leading her towards something important. And then, she saw it. At the end of the path, nestled between two massive trees, was a door. It wasn't like the others she had encountered. This door was carved from the same ancient bark as the trees, its surface marked with symbols that seemed to shift as she approached. The door was small, almost unassuming, but it radiated a quiet power. It felt ancient, like it had been waiting for her, waiting for this moment. Aveline reached out to touch it, her fingers grazing the smooth surface. The moment she made contact, the symbols on the door shimmered, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. The door opened, not with a creak, but with a soft sigh, as if it recognized her. Beyond the door was a room small and circular, its walls lined with shelves filled with books and scrolls. The air inside was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, and the soft light from above cast gentle shadows on the walls. Aveline stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested an object, a mirror. The mirror was unlike any she had ever seen. The frame was made of twisted vines, their roots entwined around the edges, and the surface of the glass shimmered with a faint, silver light. As Aveline stepped closer, she could see her reflection, but it wasn't the same as before. In the mirror, she saw herself not as she was now, but as she could be. She saw a version of herself that was stronger, more confident, a woman who stood tall in the face of any challenge. Her eyes were filled with determination, her posture proud. It was the reflection of someone who had fully embraced her true self, someone who had come into her power. Aveline reached out to touch the mirror, her fingers brushing against the surface. The moment she made contact, the reflection began to shift, and she felt a surge of energy wash over her, as if the very essence of the mirror was merging with her own being. The light from the mirror pulsed, brighter and brighter, until the room was filled with a blinding light. And then, everything stopped. Aveline stood in the center of the room, the mirror before her, but the world around her had changed. The shelves of books and scrolls were gone, replaced by an endless field of light. She was no longer in the room, but standing in the center of a vast, infinite space. The sky above was a canvas of swirling colors, the ground beneath her feet solid and firm. The air was charged with an energy she had never felt before, a power that seemed to flow through every part of her being. The key in her hand pulsed with light, and she could feel it resonating with her very soul. She was no longer just a traveler, lost in the world, she was connected to it. The power she had awakened within herself was not just her own. It was part of the universe, part of the energy that flowed through everything. Aveline closed her eyes, letting the sensation wash over her. She was no longer bound by fear or doubt. She was free. Free to choose, free to create, free to be the person she had always been meant to be. The light around her grew brighter, and she felt the world shift once more, as though the very fabric of reality was bending to her will. But this time, it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't frightening. It was empowering. With a deep breath, Aveline opened her eyes. The world before her had changed again. The infinite space was now filled with paths, each one leading in a different direction, each one representing a choice. The key in her hand pulsed with light, and she knew that each path she walked would lead her to new discoveries, new challenges, new truths. The world was hers to shape. She stepped forward, the energy from the mirror still flowing through her, and chose her path. Not because it was easy, but because it was the one she was meant to walk. And as she did, the world around her shifted once more, welcoming her as the creator of her own destiny. The final chapter, the mastery of self. Aveline stood at the edge of a vast, ever-changing landscape, the weight of her journey settling comfortably in her chest. Her hand still gripped the key, which now seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The path she had walked torn between light and shadow, between fear and courage, had brought her to this moment. The endless possibilities that once overwhelmed her now felt like the whispers of a distant past, as if she had long surpassed them. She looked around, taking in the vast horizon that stretched before her. The sky was a canvas of swirling colors: gold, violet, and deep blue. The world around her seemed to breathe in harmony, the mountains towering in the distance, the rivers winding their way through fields of glowing flowers. But it wasn't just the world that had shifted. It was her. She had changed. She had faced her darkness, walked through her fears, and now, she was ready to master her fate. The path that had once seemed full of uncertainties and choices had now become a place where she stood in full command. The key had not only unlocked the doors to unknown realms, it had unlocked something within her: the power to shape her reality, to define who she was, to carve her own path in a world that had once seemed so vast and intimidating. Aveline turned the key in her hand, feeling its energy surge through her. It was no longer just an object, it was a part of her, a reflection of her power. She had come to realize that the key was not just about opening doors to new places. It was the key to self-mastery, to unlocking the vast potential that had always been inside her. As she walked, the landscape shifted with her thoughts. The fields beneath her feet turned into crystalline structures, the air shimmering with light and energy. Every step she took seemed to transform the world, bending it to her will. She no longer felt like a passive traveler, she was now the creator, the one who shaped the world with the strength of her heart and mind. Ahead of her stood a door different from the others she had encountered, yet somehow familiar. It was made of stone, adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift as she approached. The door shimmered in the light, not in the way a physical door would, but with an aura of possibility. It felt like the culmination of everything she had learned, everything she had overcome. It was a threshold, a point of no return. She reached for the door, the key now glowing in her hand, and placed it into the lock. The door opened, not with a sound, but with an inner understanding, a resonance that vibrated in her very soul. As the door swung wide, Aveline stepped through it, stepping into a space of pure energy, a world where all her choices and paths converged. This place, this realm, was not just a destination. It was the ultimate culmination of everything she had learned, everything she had become. The infinite possibilities that had once felt overwhelming now stretched out before her like an open sky. For the first time, Aveline understood that there was no one path, no singular destination. The journey was never about finding the right path, it was about creating the one that resonated with her soul. Each choice, each step, had led her here, to this moment where she stood as the master of her own destiny. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the world around her alive, vibrant, and full of potential. She was no longer just a traveler, nor was she just a woman searching for answers. She was the embodiment of everything she had been and everything she could be. In this space, she was free. With her eyes now open, she smiled. The world ahead was limitless, and she had the power to shape it. She could feel the pulse of the universe within her, a rhythmic beat that matched her own. She was not just a part of the world, she was the creator of it, the weaver of its threads, the one who would write its story. She lifted her head toward the sky, feeling the wind against her skin, the light of 1,000 stars shining in her heart. In that moment, she knew that her journey had come full circle. She had discovered the power that had always been within her, and with it, she would forge a new world. The future no longer seemed uncertain. It was a canvas waiting for her to paint it with her choices, her actions, her dreams. And as she stood there, surrounded by the infinite possibilities that awaited her, Aveline realized something else. She had never truly been lost. She had simply been finding her way one step, one choice, one truth at a time. And now, she was ready to step forward into the world she had created. With a heart full of light, a soul full of strength, and a future full of possibility, Aveline walked onward, embracing her true self, and with every step, she shaped the destiny that was hers too. Command. The journey had ended. But for Aveline, it was only just beginning.